You know how you can go online and create a word cloud? You can take a block of text, throw it in, and it'll show you which words appear more often. You can make art out of it or whatever. Well, I took the 50-plus reviews from Amazon of my book and threw them into a word cloud because I was curious what would pop up. Obvious book, my name appears. And so I looked for the most frequently appearing adjective, and it was honest. And I take that as a great endorsement. I'm very grateful for that. I hope you'll buy the book. I hope you like it. I hope you'll email me and let me know about it. Talk back to me. The book is called What She Said and What I Heard, How One Man Shut Up and Started Listening. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
I have seen great changes in people, and I've seen great misery too, because they can't quite get underneath the pain.
What is the sound of one man listening? This is Man Listening, a fresh podcast featuring the stories of strong women who bounce back. Man Listening, because every woman deserves to be heard.
Hi, I'm Stuart Watson, and welcome to Man Listening. Boy, do I love this week's guest, this week's episode. I was on the way back from the West Coast last month and stopped a little bit off of I-40 in Las Vegas to talk to my friend Janet Nordine. Janet Nordine is trained to use play with children as therapy, to draw them out, to establish connection, and she is just spectacular at it. Now, the conversation winds all over the place, but there's something really calming about being in her presence, and I just enjoyed it so much. We sat on her back patio, very safe distance between us. It was a cool day in the desert, not like the summer at all. Didn't go into town and party and do Vegas things. Actually got my oil changed there. But anyway, here's Janet. Where were you born?
I was born in Henderson, Nevada.
How do you know?
That's what I was told growing up, and also what my birth certificate says.
Do you have your original birth
I
certificate?
don't. In the state of Nevada, those are sealed once the adoption is final. So I'm an adopted person, so mine is locked in a vault in Carson City.
Can you go to a judge, or is there any way to get into that vault?
I have known people that have been able to do that, and I've thought about it over the years. I just haven't put the time and expense and effort into doing it.
Is it important to you? It's more important to some adopted people than others.
I would say probably 10 years ago it was super important to me. I was involved in trying to get legislation passed in Nevada to open adoptee records. But since that time, like many adoptees, I did my DNA testing with Ancestry, and I found my whole family, and I was able to meet my first mother, my birth mother, and knowing where I came from and how I became a person and what that was like has really settled my soul. So the drive to get the original birth certificate isn't as strong as it used to be. If some miracle happened and they opened, of course I would ask for it just out of curiosity, but it's not as important.
So how did that happen? How did you come to be reunited with?
I, as I said, did my DNA test. It was in October of 2016. And then the following, I had some hits, and I sent out the messages like so many people do, and nobody really replied. And then in the February of 2018, it was February 1st, and I received a message from a first cousin who I'd matched with and who I'd messaged, who finally had logged in for some reason and said, I think I have some information for you. And he spelled out all of the people's names that I'd been asking about, and then told his sister So that happened while I was at work as we were leaving, and then I got home. Had another message from his sister, who's my first cousin, who said, here's Barb, is my birth mother's name. Here's Barb's number. She's waiting for you to call. And that was in a matter of 45 minutes. And I'd been thinking about this for 25, 30 years, and suddenly here it was in front of me. And I looked at my husband and said, well, what do I do? And he says, I think you should call. So that was the story.
So he was very supportive of all this.
Yeah, he was in the room for the phone call, and yeah, it was one of those moments that, those core memories that you don't lose, how you felt, where you were, all those kinds of things.
How did you feel?
Surprised, elated, terrified, hopeful. Then after the phone call, I kind of had after you plan a great vacation and you come home, that feeling that what just happened? And, my life just felt different. It's like my cells readjusted to themselves, and I don't know. I don't even have words, that so many adoptees have a hard time articulating those feelings, and I think it's because we have that pre-verbal experience of trauma, that we can't really put into words, so I still struggle a little bit with that.
You're a person who operates, at the political level. I mean, you were an activist to try to get this done.
Yes.
My adopted sister has done this, including going to the National Conference of State Legislators and picketing, protesting, informational picketing.
Yeah.
It's not so much chanting or
Sure.
carrying signs as it is an educational process. What was that like politically to try to influence people, and what did you bump up against? Because I gather the law has not changed.
It has not changed, and from what I understand, in the baby scoop era, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes black marketing of babies, and people of power being able to adopt over people without power. And when we went to the legislature, I very clearly remember one of the legislators who since passed away after my testimony saying, "You must not have a very good relationship with your adopted family," knowing nothing about me, knowing nothing about the reason I was there. But that was his opinion, and that stuck with me for a long time.
My understanding is that the Senate in Nevada is now majority women.
It is,
And
yes.
that is the only legislative body in the U.S. that is majority women.
Absolutely correct.
Would that change anything?
I would be hopeful that it would. I really would be hopeful that it would. I know that there's, I've been behind the scenes conversation with people that worked with the bill back those many years ago, and, there's rumblings that we could try again, and I'm going to be there to support whatever happens.
By the same token, correct me if I'm wrong, Nevada is the only state with legalized sex work.
Part of our state's history and culture. In Clark County, where we are right now, we don't have legalized sex work, but in other counties, Nye County, which is about an hour and a half away from here, that's the closest place that has brothels, and it's very much maintained, and the women that work there are doing it for their various reasons, and I've always been a supporter of sex workers. I've seen them in my practice. I worked with them in various ways, and so.
And the reason I ask that is because the majority of sex workers in Nevada are women. So to that extent, it is a women's issue, a women's rights issue. And in my experience, the majority of people who are active in the realm of public policy and therapy, whether they're seeking therapy or providing it in the adoption world, birth mothers, children, etc., are women.
Very
I mean, it's like 80,
90%.
Yeah. I don't care if they're PhDs or just people seeking their original families. What the heck's up with that? What's going on?
That's a good question, Stuart. And I wonder if it's, women are organically put together as nurturers, and it's not that men don't nurture. Our brains work differently. That's just the way we are. I don't know if it's I'd like to think, this is my thought now that you've asked the question, that birth mothers and adoptees were connected at some point, very much connected, and that severing or amputation, as you've said, which that word just fits, doesn't it? That's a wound that isn't easily healed. even myself, I'm seeking something, like wondering about things, and is this connection real? Is it not real with friends and family and other people I come in contact with? So it's a continual seeking. So I'm wondering if that's part of it, is that amputation, that severing, that removal, all those words that we use.
That explains why the children,
Yes.
and it explains the biological.
Yeah.
What it doesn't explain is, happened to me too.
Sure.
And yet when you and I met in a group where we're, looking to grow and heal and have resilience, I don't care what group it is, if you say concerned united birth parents, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because the vast majority of them are not the fathers
Correct.
seeking these children, it's the mothers. And the vast majority of children are not the sons, it's the daughters who are doing it. And so, there's a whole nature-nurture battle about that too, whether it's how we're wired or how the culture teaches us. I just run into a lot of men who say, no, I'm good.
It doesn't come up for them.
Right.
Yeah.
How about in your practice?
In my practice, I work with, for 10 years I've worked with children in foster care. I'm still seeing children in foster care, but I've just recently, this year, right before the pandemic, opened a private practice. And so I see a lot of children. I'm a registered play therapist supervisor, so that's my thing. I love kids.
So you get on the floor with them?
Oh, yes, I do. I do.
And it sounds fun.
And I can get up off the floor still, too, so that's the good news. Yeah, it's lots of fun, but the majority of children I've seen in the foster care system are males, because they have this rage in them. And people see it as these angry kids, and you have to do something about their behavior. But it's not the behavior that I treat. It's the loss of connection, the loss of attachment. I'm looking to build something with these kids that they can rely on, like some trust, that I'm not going to go away, that I'm going to be there for them, and I'm going to be there next week too, even if they've ripped my office up this week. And, we as a society are looking at behaviors, but we're not looking at what's underlying the behavior. Where's the hurt? Where's the trauma? So that's what I'm looking for. But I do have a lot of male kids in my practice, and it's just always been that way, because they're the ones with the rage.
You don't go to prison for wanting to really hurt people. You go to prison for hurting them.
Yes. And something hurt you before you turned into the person that began hurting others.
Right.
Yeah. I've spent many hours in the juvenile hall here, sitting with kids that have been, put there for various reasons, and they're all, the majority of them have been very contrite and very sorrowful that they did the thing that they did that ended them up there. And I always tell them, I'm not so concerned about what you did, but what happened in you that caused you to do that.
How quickly in this whole process do you say, I understand that rage because I didn't know my mother either?
Sure. When I first started as a therapist about 13 years ago, I was really careful in what I disclosed about myself, because that's what we were told to do in school. But nowadays, sometimes in the first or second session, if I know the child's adopted, I'll tell them I'm adopted too. And there's various levels of you too. You mean grown-ups are too? Or they're like, how old are you? That was happening then. Or,
You're like 1,000 years old.
I know, you're so old. So, I think it's an important knowing that they can look at me and I can look at them, and we have that shared experience, so it may be different for each of us. And I can say to kids, I'm just curious about the reason you made that big lie to your mom and your dad is to cover something up. Were you worried maybe they'll send you back? I had that worry too, and I'll share a story with them about something I did when I was in 3rd grade that was kind of a big deal. And I was.
Can you share that with me?
Sure. I told a big whopper of a lie because I wanted a pet bird.
What was the lie?
That the teacher said I had to bring one to school on Friday.
That's a great kid lie.
I know. And my parents were like, okay. And my dad took me to Kmart, and we picked out a bird.
So they bought it, or they just were like?
Not really. That's a good question, actually. But, my mom being a teacher, she contacted the teacher, and sure enough, the lie was exposed. And I remember sitting in the bedroom with my dad, and he was so upset, and I'd never done anything like this. I was like the perfect model adoptee child, because that's kind of how I was, and him saying, we're going to take the bird back. And I was devastated that I was going to lose this bird, so they took it back to Kmart, and I was in trouble for a while. But then following birthday, they got me a bird. So it wasn't like, and I remember articulating to him, I know you're not going to keep me now. And he was like, tears, welled up in his eyes. And he said, of course not, we're going to keep you. We just can't keep the bird. I don't know if he understood the deepness of what I was feeling, but yeah, that was a bit. But I tell kids that story, and I share that because it's kind of lighthearted, but pretty serious at the same time. And then I can ask the question, are you worried that they may not keep you, your parents? And 9 kids out of 10 will say yes.
And as a grown man, as I say, a grown-ass man, I had those feelings.
Sure.
That my wife of 40 years is playing the long con.
Yeah.
And that, when I get retirement age, or when and people say, that is just bizarre. That is just defies reason that someone would stay with you for 40 years and then all of a sudden,
peace out.
Yeah. When you're in your 60s, your retirement age.
We just had our 30th anniversary this year, and I used to have those feelings too, but they're not as big and strong as they used to be. But in the beginning of our marriage, I was really worried that he would see through the fraud of whoever I thought I was at that time and leave.
What work did you do? How did you do that work? How were you able to achieve this kind of resilience?
Therapy. I'm a therapist. I still go to therapy. Actually, that's where I was right before you came here. So I just came from a session, which was helpful and useful and beautiful, as it always is. Really knowing something. And when I first went to therapy, I thought, I'm a new mom. I work a lot. I was a hotel executive manager, and not a new mom. My kids were in school, but I was just overwhelmed with life, and just things that had happened. And I just went and we have our 6 employee assistance program sessions, and I'm like, that's all I need. I'm just going to go get a little...
Going to get fixed.
Yeah, going to go get a little talking
Go in for a little adjustment.
Yep. And I spent 10 years with that therapist. So,
I went in 2006, and I said, basically, how long is this going to take?
Right.
We'll be done. We've done. Listen, this session is costing $140. That should do it, right? You should be able to, almost like a chiropractor, just a little adjustment.
Yeah.
And she's like, we're not even going to know. And I know people in recovery who lie for months or years before they ever tell this person the truth, and they're paying. It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humans are weird, aren't we? Yeah. It's
Why
really
don't
messy
you
being
tell the
human.
person where it hurts? It will help them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Well, you're no longer a hotel executive.
No.
How did you make that jump to following your calling,
Sure.
to connecting the vocation?
When 9/11 happened, I was working at a hotel, and I was an executive manager, and the Las Vegas economy, kind of like it is now, tanked, and all executive level managers were let go, and I had no plan B. I didn't know what else to do, because that's what I'd been doing, and I'd just fallen into this career on accident. I just took a kind of a part-time job at the Mirage Hotel when it opened, and I was there for 10 years, and I'd had this job, and so I decided to go back to school. And when I had gone to school right out of high school, before I thought about being a social worker or a journalist. Those were some things I was interested in, so I went back to school and got my degree in counseling, and then I got an advanced degree, a master's in marriage and family therapy. And so
it surprises a lot of people. They think journalists might be politicians or movie stars or TV stars or whatever. At the number of journalists who the second career is social worker or minister, therapist, or something in helping other human beings. Yeah. And that really surprises people.
I think journalism, people that write and really write well, that comes from somewhere deep inside. It's not just, you put your words on the paper and you're done.
And that that feeling of wanting to help the helpless and hold the powerful accountable, that's a deeply sensed...
Tell their story.
Tell their story, and a sense of justice, a sense of almost like Robin Hood or, any kind of hero that you're going to fight for the weak person.
Yep.
And I mean, who could be weaker than a child in the foster care system who's buffeted around?
You know, a tiny baby. I mean,
exactly.
I think about being a tiny baby and where I was born. I knew this story because I'd asked people ever before I met Barb about the 2 doors, and there was 2 doors in the delivery room, and the mom went out one door and the baby went out the other door to the lovingly called bastard wing. It wasn't really named that, but that's what people called it, you know, because it was the Catholic Hospital and Catholic Charities was doing a lot of adoptions in the 60s, and so that's where we went. The babies went, and I think about tiny baby me and wondering what's just happened. You know, who am I with? It's not, you don't smell like the person I just came from, and all those kinds of tiny baby feelings that any tiny baby would feel. I think about babies going to the NICU. They have the same, you know, emergent feeling of, I shouldn't be in this situation. I should be with the person I came from, the mother I came from.
When did you learn to feel in your gut that this is not something that's wrong with me? In other words, that I'm not to blame for that feeling, because there's an entire world out there, including many people who will hear this, who say, you had a great life. Why didn't you just suck it up? Why, you know, I mean, you don't even remember those things. Why?
Sure.
And so there's a world of misunderstanding, I think. When did you learn that anyone who had this experience would have these feelings? Like, this is so common among adoptees.
When I started learning about the connection with our nervous system, polyvagal theory, and how our nervous system reacts, you know, any person would react that way, having been removed from their mother at birth. Our nervous system goes into fight or flight or freeze. I know myself very well, and I freeze. My breath gets shallow. I hold very still. I can feel it coming when it's happening, and I can intervene and I can do other things now. But one of the things my current therapist has taught me is I'm not bad and I've done nothing wrong, and I deserve love and affection just like everyone else. And I can say that to my clients when they have felt like something's really happened that they can't repair. It's, you're not bad and you've done nothing wrong. And that's for all of us, adoptees, non-adoptees, people that suffer, people that have pain.
In doing research, I pulled out a whole bunch of family history, and I had it strewn around a room. And my wife wanted all that junk put away.
Junk.
And she came upon a scrap of paper, and it had my dad's handwriting on it, my adopted dad, and just a little note. And she said, "This is trash," and was getting ready to just throw it out. And I had a meltdown.
Sure.
As a 60-year-old man, I had a meltdown over this tiny scrap of paper with my father's handwriting on it. Do you ever have wildly disproportionate reactions to what seems to your husband or the world to be, hey, it's just a little scrap of paper?
Yep. Yes, I tell my husband all the time, I'm battling my sentimentality. Like, I hold on to things that have no meaning to anyone else but me. And it may be a blink of an eye of a memory, but it's important to me. I lost my dad last year, my adopted dad, my dad. And I have in my closet, he had ordered, I don't know where he got them from, these sponges that you clean your pans with. But he put them in a Ziploc bag and he used a Sharpie and wrote my name on it. And I still have it. And when I buy new sponges, I put them in the same bag.
You get emotional.
Yeah, because he wrote my name on it with a Sharpie.
About this bag of sponges.
I have a salt and pepper shaker. The last couple of years of his life, he had some dementia, and he wrote the chemical compound for salt on the top of the salt shaker so he'd know what it was, N2, whatever, I don't even know what it is.
Right.
But it's still there. I still use it. Even though I have new ones in the cupboard, they're exactly the same. I won't replace it. I'm not ready.
So there's something about things that our family members have touched, like held close to them.
Yeah, I have a bowl from my birth mother that she said was her mother's. My cousins have said it may not have been. I don't care what the story is. She gave it to me to bring home, and it's sitting in there.
When I met my birth mother, when she was in the boarding home. It wasn't a home for unwed mothers. She was taking care of old people to kind of earn her keep.
Right.
In Macon, Georgia. A woman there who saw how pregnant she was crocheting a blanket, a baby blanket, and she gave it to my mother. I want you to know, Janet, my mother held that for 45
Of course she
years.
did. It was you to her.
And when I met her, she gave it to me.
Oh my goodness. How beautiful is that? Yeah.
And I still have it.
Yeah.
And now it goes from a corner in her closet to a corner in my closet.
Yeah.
Now people in my household would say, what are you doing with an old baby blanket? We don't have any babies around here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that was a baby blanket that never got used.
Of course.
Because the baby was gone.
Yeah. Taken.
Yeah.
Severed. Amputated.
Amputated. Yeah. It's such a trip. And one thing that, because there's a way of people saying almost that these feelings are like we were classified, not legitimate, that these feelings are not legitimate, that you're not allowed. It's like, get over it. Don't be such a victim or a whiner. Just get over this. And one thing that legitimized them for me is saying, it's not about adoption. These same feelings occur on the part of orphans, foster kids, and those who are adopted.
Children.
Divorced children.
We humans are made to attach and to stay attached. The movie Avatar,
Yes.
where they imprint on each other.
Yes.
And they remember that imprint. That's what humans do.
Yes. We're hardwired.
We're hardwired for connection, absolutely.
It's in the neural pathways.
Absolutely. And that vagus nerve runs all the way through our body. Every organ is attached to it, and that's our nervous system speaking and telling you, giving you information, keeping you curious.
Yeah. And the question that I always get and that I always hear, and it occurs with PTSD, it occurs with all these types of reactions, is you have two people, and for purposes of a thought experiment, I say, make them identical twins. They were raised in the same bedroom, same mother, same father, they went to the same school, they were in the same classes for purposes of this experiment. So their environment was the same, and their DNA is identical.
Right.
And they both go to war, or they both witness a horrific accident in front of their eyes. One of them might exhibit symptoms of PTSD very different from the other one. And we would say, well, why is this identical twin courageous or resilient or whatever noble word we want to use for them, and the other one is weak or a victim or damaged? How do you explain that to people?
I think it has a lot to do with resilience is one part of it. I think adoptees are super resilient. I think
obviously they're alive.
Sure, we're still kicking. The other thing I think is interesting, and I use this example with clients, if we're all standing on a street corner and see the same car accident, I might see the blue car hit the red car first, but you might see the red car hit the blue car first. It's however our brain and our nervous system takes in the information. And on any given day, we could respond a different way. It just depends on the moment.
There's so much of this also involves story.
Sure.
The story I told myself about my parents is that they were, and I'm embarrassed of this, was that my parents had to be, quote unquote, trailer trash. That they had to be impoverished, that my mother had to be promiscuous, and I had all this kind of judgment about what type. It turned out they were from, quote unquote, the best people. They were moneyed, well educated, graduate degrees, very moral, upright, respected in the community. None of my expectations and prejudices, the story that I told myself, was actually borne out once I met them. And there's so many other things like that. that the story we tell ourselves just sort of rationalizes or...
Yeah, it had to make it okay for you to be adopted because they weren't really upstanding people, so it's a better thing you went with this other family.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have had that's a story I told myself about, both religious and just to make myself feel okay. And my story was she had to be young. You know, she had to have made a mistake and gotten pregnant. And my spiritual story is, you know, I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. I'm still practicing and not as active as I used to be, but still believe, still practice. But we believe in life before life, that I made some agreement with God that I just wanted to get down here and get to work and get a body, and I'll take wherever you get me, as long as I can go to a Mormon family. And so that's how I ended up where I was, because there's such a roadmap to this family that raised me. But that's a lie I had to tell myself to be okay.
Was your biological mother a Mormon?
No.
She was not. What was her?
Not. Well, when I got my non-identifying information from Catholic Charities after paying them money for my own information, it said that she already had 5 children and her children had been put in foster care. So that gave me information, and the information written about my father seemed like he was probably married. So she'd had an affair of some sort with a married man and became pregnant with me. Then when I met her, she told me the whole story, and just so many pieces of my life just settled and I was okay.
How much of that because portions of my biological mother went through my 8 pages
Mine did too. I brought mine with me.
And she circled line by line, and she wrote in the margins, not true, not true, not true.
You know, I have a funny story. She very outspoken, Barb very outspoken. She didn't mince words. She just gave it to you straight, and that's one thing I appreciated about her. She didn't sugarcoat anything when she told me my story, but she went through my non-identifying information. My husband and I still laugh about this. She said that she enjoyed sports. And my whole life growing up, I played softball, I played volleyball. I was like, of course I did, because she loves sports. She said, sports? I hate sports. And we looked at each other, and so every time the word sports comes up, we both go, sports. You know, like...
Do you think that is intentional? Because
I don't know if it's intentional. I mean, there were a lot of things in there that were stretches, she said. You know, like they just needed to put something down.
Well, do you think it's there to make this? It's almost like adopting a puppy, and you tell people that it's a purebred when it's really not.
Yeah. I do think it makes the baby more attractive to the adopting parents.
Right. And what I wonder is if they went back and put intentional red herrings in there, because they said that my father was in the Air Force, he was in the Marine Corps. They said his father was a law professor, he was a firefighter. They said he had 3 daughters, he had 2 sons. They said that his brother prosecuted charges against him and sent him to jail. It was his brother-in-law. You know, there are all
Close,
these...
but not quite. Yeah.
Right. There's all this fudging.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if that's to throw you off the trail so you can't use that to locate.
Sure. I mean, I've thought about that, and there's all kinds of conspiracy theories in my head that I can come up with, but it kind of doesn't matter to me anymore.
Right.
But I think probably that's some of it, sure.
Well,
it talked about my biological father being a bartender, and Barb said he wasn't a bartender. But then she couldn't really remember what he did, so I don't know.
I have to ask this.
Sure.
Because I need a reading on this. My adopted dad had been in the state legislature. He was chairman of the Democratic Executive Committee for the county. He was involved in politics. He was a person who had a certain stature, taught Sunday school, etc. My biological father was an attorney, and my adopted sister's biological father was an attorney, both of whom had gone to prison. Actually, the same year, different prisons, different charges. I'm wondering, and I'll never really know, I don't think, if my father was able to sort of hear through the grapevine or the legal that these children were, myself and my sister, were available.
That's very common. I do know of somebody, let's see, whose parent was a state senator, and they had not known they were adopted until...
Birth parent.
No, biological, or adoptive parent was a state senator. And she did not know she was adopted until after her parents had died and she found the paperwork.
Oh my word.
Yeah, so there was much cover-up and worry that somebody would come and kidnap her from the parents, and so I always wonder, like people in power, because there's lots of celebrities and lots of political people that adopt children. There has to be some, especially in Nevada. I've heard the black market was very easy to get children here.
Well, there were black markets all over the place, and there were notorious cases in Augusta, Georgia, or Memphis, etc. And those stories are told as though they're one-offs, as though, look at this horrible man or woman, and if you just root them out and prosecute them, then there's a whole system. Yeah. There's a whole international system which is corrupt.
Yeah, trafficking, sure.
And it just blows my mind because church and state legitimize this on a worldwide level.
And it continues. Yeah. It wasn't just our era, it continues. I mean, look at the babysitter, been in cages for years. They're being adopted to families because they can't find their parents. So, down in Texas.
So it's certainly in a plain old capitalist system, there's certainly a tremendous demand. I mean, but once those kids get to be teenage years...
Yeah, sometimes if things haven't been handled well in the beginning, those years are very challenging.
Like if there's not a fixed adoption when they're cute little kids, when they're punching holes in walls and setting fires.
Or if adoption has been something we don't talk about because we just don't talk about it. I love you enough, you don't need to know that story.
And I'm wondering, from a public policy point of view, are there any programs that, like, why do we have to call, if these people are stable and they're raising the child, why do we have to call them mom and dad? Why can't there just be really good people who raise this child and send them away to school? I mean, why does it have to be...
legally binding?
Well, no, more calling it mom and dad. You can make it legally binding. Sure. Why do you have to say it's a family the same as a biological family?
I think it's tradition. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on that one.
But
I do know I have worked with foster homes that children, because of their attachment wounds, they'll immediately call their new foster parent mom or dad, immediately. Then they'll move to the next foster home. Oh, this is mom and dad. Because it's their need to have that person represent that role.
If I really wanted to hurt my mom as a teenager, as a, rebellious
I know where
argument,
you're going. Yeah.
I called her Nell.
Did you? That was her name? Yeah.
I didn't call her mom. I regret it.
It was a very normal teenage thing to do.
Yeah.
You weren't bad and you did nothing wrong. You were acting exactly how a teenager would act.
I can tell you're a good therapist.
You can forgive yourself on that one, I think. Let that one go.
You're a good therapist.
Thanks.
Let me know how much I owe you.
Nothing. It's a freebie today.
It's an introductory session.
Yes.
Yeah. How can you be around the foster care system without being burnt out, fried, despondent?
Yeah. There's been times. Currently, I only see a smaller fraction of my practice is foster children, but for 7 years straight, that was day in and day out was foster care. And I really, there's so much synchronicity in my story, in my life. And when I saw that I had brothers that had been in foster care, I kind of made this unknown pact to myself that that's what I wanted, to be able to help kids like that, because I had no idea what they went through or where they were at that time when I got that information. But when I became a therapist, the very first job I was offered, which I took because I needed one, was working with children in foster care. And I was like, oh, that's right, I remember. And then I made a connection with a psychiatrist there, and they opened a new practice, and they asked me to join, and I was like delighted, because I really wanted to affect change in these kids' life, because I kind of had an idea of what that was like. My parents adopted me from foster care because the first family I went to didn't stick, it didn't work out, and then I was removed by the county and put in foster care. And so
How old were you then?
I was almost 1. So even though I was a tiny baby, I still knew somewhere in my cells that just what that felt like and how that story might have gone for me. So even on the most burned out days, I just had to go home and regroup, and I figured out a way somewhere in my ability to kind of put a force field around me, so my story stays my story and their story stays theirs. And there's some horrific things that happen to children, but by the hands of their own parents and grandparents, and they end up in the system. And if I can alleviate some of that pain and help them feel connected to another person, I really want to be able to do that.
By the same token, you're able to see those who escape, those who are able to make tremendous progress and go out and be productive and not be either suicidal or addicted to drugs.
I have seen great changes in people, and I've seen great misery too, because they can't quite get underneath the pain.
Yeah. We mentioned sex work, which absolutely fascinates me. And because you have treated women, I gather, in sex work.
Yeah, for a brief period of time, I worked for an agency who provided therapy for an organization here in town called Hookers for Jesus. So I worked with a few of the girls there, but I've also worked with strippers, people that have, in that line of work too. So
here's the question I wrestle with. Is there such a thing as, I used to say ethical, let's say healthy. Is there such a thing as healthy sex work?
I'm not.
Or is that a unicorn? Or is that a...
That isn't. I have been pretty far removed from that work for quite some time, but I do know that there are people that choose that line of work because they choose that line of work. I've chosen a line of work, you've chosen. I don't see it as an evil, awful thing that people are doing. Some people have to do that to make a living. To be transparent, when I met my birth mother, I learned that I was conceived because of sex work. She was soliciting to be able to make life work for her and her kids. So,
did that change the way you looked at her or yourself or the...
It just made sense. And it was okay. Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of had this idea that I'm here for a bigger purpose. Sometimes I've fought that. Sometimes I've like, oh, that's some fantasy you've made up in your brain. But if I can be kind to someone else, it's all worth it. If somebody can gather or gain something from my compassion, then it's been worth it. The hurt that I've had because of where I came from. But when I had the story and I had all the pieces put together, like I said before, it just kind of settled in me and it was okay.
We all doubt ourselves.
Yeah, we're experts at that.
On bad days.
Yeah.
Tell me a story about when something happened and you said, yeah, that's why I'm here. That's
sure.
I don't feel meaningless. I feel I actually made a difference in that case.
When you asked that question, I had an immediate vision and response to that. I worked for a few years at the local rape crisis center while I was in graduate school, and I was a first responder to the hospital with victims. And you'd get calls in the middle of the night, and this is one of those middle of the night calls when the phone goes off and you have to go to the hospital, and you're like, oh, it's 2 a.m, it's in my bed, And I went, and the victim was a homeless woman, and I can't, I don't have to. Homeless people are not clean. There was a certain malodorous presence with her, and she'd had her exam. I'd done talking to her, we'd set up a cab for her to go somewhere. And her hands were shaking, whether it was from trauma or substance, it didn't really matter, but she couldn't get her shoes untied to get them on her feet. So I sat on the floor and I untied her shoes and I put them on her feet. And she just looked at me, and then we walked out, waited for the cab, and she just hugged me and said, "No one's been that nice to me in a long time." All I did was untie her shoes. But that stayed with me all these many years, because that was just, I didn't think of it in the moment, but she just needed to get her shoes on, But I've thought about that and it really has shaped how I treat people. If I can just tie your shoes, help you get on your way.
I honor your work.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
As I left Janet that day and drove east to get back to Flagstaff, Arizona that night, the sun was setting as I went down past the Hoover Dam, and I was thinking about our conversation and just how blessed I am, just how grateful I am to know people like Janet. I mean, just a good person, just a good person who helps an awful lot of people. And I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you, Janet.
Man Listening is a production of Unmediated LLC in cooperation with the Queen City Podcast Network and Balto Creative Media. Allison Andrews at Andrews Creative and Rachel Clapp-Miller are developmental producers. Sally Higgins at Higgins & Owens tries to keep us legal. Our music is A Day at the Park by the group Pictures of the Floating World. Your announcer is Catherine Smith. That's me. Please go to our Patreon page. You'll find us at patreon.com. Look for Man Listening, one word, no spaces. We hope you'll join us by becoming a member. A small investment can raise up the conversation. If you want exclusive member merch, like a t-shirt, we can arrange that too.
As Man Listening passes the 1-year mark, getting into season 2, an episode every week, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has supported us from the very beginning. I'll never forget you.
Don't forget to support us at Patreon. We believe one voice can change the conversation. Click the subscribe button, and next week you'll hear.
I just remember at the time thinking I needed to do the opposite of what my birth mom had done. I needed to keep my baby with me and be devoted to her.
That's next week on Man Listening. Thanks.